Welcome to the Untamed and Unapologetic podcast. This is a podcast for women moving into their second half of life with a lot of excitement. We're not moving into that second half of life. We're not going to be quiet anymore. This is time to really shine. And we're going to talk about everything in this podcast, from our sexuality to health to wellness to anything else you can think of. My name's Laura Battellini, and this is my younger sister, Christy, right? Yeah. And why are we qualified to do this podcast? Because we're in midlife, goddammit, and that's what qualifies us. No, well, I'm a fitness professional and aspiring therapist, and Christy, you're. Yeah. So we started our first two podcasts talking about a little bit about sex and sexuality, and that sort of led us to thinking about the pelvic floor. And so today we brought on our first guest, very exciting, and she is a friend and also a former colleague that I used to work with. And I am going to read you her bio. Her name is Suzanne Coe, and I'm going to read you her bio because it's pretty interesting. So Suzanne has been in the fitness industry for over 2 decades. She started out as a group fitness instructor. After the 2008 crash, and she lost her job in the corporate design industry, she pivoted and got certified as a trainer and a yoga teacher. After the traumatic birth of her older daughter in 2006, it resulted in a pelvic organ prolapse. She sought out education on the pelvic floor to not only help herself, but her clients to recover from birth. She's passionate about educating families about the importance of their overall health, as well as the importance of how the nervous system plays a vital role. So welcome, Suzanne, to our podcast. We're really happy to have you here. So thank you for being
here. Thank you. Actually, my daughter was born in 2016, but
Oh, sorry, 2016.
No,
that's right.
I probably mistyped it. I was like,
yeah, 2006. Wait, I thought she was, that's because she's a little bit younger than my daughter, right? Who was born. Yeah, she's a little bit younger. Yeah. So 2016. Sorry about that. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell sort of a little bit more in detail about sort of what you went through, your story about her birth and sort of what happened and that led you sort of where you are today.
Okay. So when I was pregnant with my older daughter, I was 42 years old. And at the time, I didn't really think I could get pregnant naturally, and I actually did. And my husband and I, we actually delayed starting a family because of that 2008 crash. And so I was excited when I got pregnant, but I thought it would be a typical pregnancy that you see on TV. And by all means, it was not. It was anything but that. In the last month of my pregnancy, when they started those non-stress test appointments, my OB/GYN said, your blood pressure is high, and was fine the entire time because I was working in a gym. I think we were in the same gym at the time.
Yeah, I think we were.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were.
And I was working, so I was always moving. So like my blood pressure was never an issue. It wasn't until that last month. And in the last couple of weeks of that month, after like a typical non-stress test appointment, they said your blood pressure's high. We had to send you to triage at Northwestern, and then you need to follow up within our office. And the last follow-up, they said, nope, you're staying put. We're going to induce you. You're going to have a baby today. I said, no. What I wanted.
No, wait, I'm not ready. I have clients.
Right. I was actually thought I was going to go back to the gym.
Wait, I'm busy.
And so I call my husband. I'm like, hey, I know we didn't have the bags packed, but you need to pack a bag and meet me at the hospital.
Let's go.
Yeah. luckily we had some of the stuff like prepared, but obviously I didn't have any of my essentials. He met me at the hospital. This was probably like 3:30 in the afternoon. And because my body, I don't think was physically ready, they had to insert a balloon to get me to, essentially be dilated enough and then my doctor came in and broke my water and started Pitocin. And the Pitocin was so intense, and my dreams of like moving around in labor and moving and do all the things that I teach my clients about, that I was like, I'm going to be squatting and all these things, that it was so painful that I was in bed the entire time, did not want to move. And it wasn't until finally a midwife came in and said, you need to move around. And I said, fine. But it was like very painful.
Ouch.
And then the situation turned worse, where I was on a birthing ball and the labor nurse who was on call at the time wasn't paying attention to the fetal monitor. My doctor comes in and is like, there's no fetal activity for the last 20 minutes. I'm like, so the whole crash team comes into our room. And then I started having bloody show, and it was just like all of a sudden it was an emergency situation that I wasn't planning on. I didn't want to be birthing on my back, and my doctor, who happened to be my client as well, she tried to support me as much as she could, but she was very not knowledgeable. She's used to doing C-sections, not, and so I was squatting and rocking, and she said, she says, if you don't work with me, you're going to have an emergency C-section. I'm like, no, I'm not having an emergency
No, I don't want that,
C-section.
right?
And the whole fear mongering that happened was just like, I just couldn't believe it. And so I didn't realize that because I was in such shock. My husband told me afterwards, and probably not even afterwards, probably like a year or two later, that it was a male resident while my doctor was sitting next to him that delivered my baby via forceps. My own
So you
doctor,
didn't know.
I didn't
You
know,
didn't realize this.
didn't realize this.
Wow.
And then afterwards, they said I had a second-degree tear. So they had just like, oh, we just need to stitch you up. I'm like, I thought that was like normal. I didn't really know that that wasn't. And then my daughter was delivered, and the doctor had this concerned look on his face. And he's like, well, we found something on your daughter. We don't know what it is. So we're going to take her to NICU. And I'm like, what? I didn't get like skin to skin. I couldn't even hold my baby. She went straight to the NICU. And, you know, when I got out of the bed for the first time, I realized like, oh, this hurts. I can't move. And so they put me in a wheelchair to go downstairs to elevator to the NICU. I struggled with breastfeeding because she didn't have any mom contact. And so it was a very high stress situation. She was in the NICU for 24 hours, and none of the pediatricians had any idea. They referred me to the specialist at Lurie Children's, who's the head of ENT, but he was on call like or working. We didn't get to see him until like after I was discharged. Turned out she had like what they call, finally we found out it was called a venous lymphatic malformation, where there's 5 macrocysts sitting on her right clavicle, and we don't know. And years later, I finally found out it was the Tdap vaccine that I took during her pregnancy, and I was actually in the emergency room during my pregnancy because I couldn't breathe and I had whooping cough. And when I was working at, like training clients, and I'm like coughing, and they're like, it's just not what I'm, going back to everything, I realized like it was that Tdap that was pushed for me to get. And it was
Interesting.
timed around the time. And it's funny because they had to do a 3D ultrasound on her because she had a right dilated kidney. So don't you think during that ultrasound they would pick up on something like that? But they didn't.
Huh.
And so they said that, well, she may not walk. She may need some sort of invasive surgery.
Uh,
Um, and I was like a little bit of depression because she wouldn't latch, and so my daughter or my husband had to help. They actually gave me
right.
formula in the hospital because she wouldn't latch and she was screaming and she was hungry. It wasn't until we finally got a lactation consultant to come to the house, and
Right.
we were able to figure it out, got the latch, got her going. And her pediatrician said, well, she has a little flat spot on her head. I said, well, yeah, because she can't turn her head to the right because it hurts. So of course she's going to have a little flat spot. So she sent us to the physical therapist. Thankfully, the physical therapist, with her help, trying to tackle what was supposed to be for a flat spot, actually moving the lymph inner system, because the right clavicle is one of the major draining points for the lymphatic
Yeah.
system. It was able to heal the mass. So she ended up going through 2 sedated MRIs under the age of 1 to figure
Wow.
it out. They couldn't find any answers. And by that point, she was already healed. But,
Wow.
it was,
So all this trauma then, as a result of sort of this birth, then, so what was your diagnosis from a like pelvic floor
that
issue
was
that
interesting.
resulted from childbirth then?
So it was very interesting because the trainer I was working with, she's like, "Well, I have a friend who is a male physical therapist, and he knows about the pelvic floor." And I'm like, "Okay." So I went to go see him, but he wasn't really doing. I thought I was getting the help from him, and actually, I'm going to circle back. At my 6-week postpartum
Mhm.
checkup, I wasn't being seen by my OB. It was just a nurse that was on duty. Like I felt like I was just, like you saw me for my entire pregnancy, and I'm seeing a nurse, not my own doctor.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
I said, I'm leaking. Actually, I asked for a pelvic floor physical therapy like referral, and she says, "Why do you need it?" And I said, she wanted me to give her a reason in order for her to write a script for it. It wasn't a
Mm.
standard. And so I said, "Well, I'm leaking a little bit of urine." She's like, "Okay." But that otherwise she wouldn't have given me the referral.
So you had to push for it,
I had to
is
push
what you're
for it.
saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember one day I was on waiting for a train after one of my first physical therapy appointments, and I've been running the train. All of a sudden, I leaked so much urine, like to the point where it was so much. I'm like, this is insane. Like it was more than just a little leak. It was basically emptying my entire bladder, and I was
Uh,
like aghast. Like I couldn't believe. And I was seeing this guy for like several months, and he wasn't helping me. And so I said, this is not right. And so I said, I need to find somebody else to help me. And so I'm
right.
searching on the internet, trying to find like courses, or nothing existed. And I found one course finally that wasn't releasing until December of 2016. So I gave birth in February of 2016, and it was releasing for
Wow.
um, by a personal trainer she specializes in working with pregnant and postpartum women, and she created this course for just strictly to help postpartum clients. I'm like, okay, this is what I need and to help myself. And I'm like, I need to help other women too, because nobody knew anything. There's nothing that existed at that time in terms of continuing education.
And it's
And
really not that
during,
long ago.
no, it wasn't that long ago.
Really. I mean, you think
Yeah,
about it.
it was
Yeah.
crazy. And
Yeah.
so during the course, there were like a lot of like pelvic floor physical therapists as guest speakers, and they're talking about pelvic organ prolapse. And then I was putting like the pieces together. I'm like, do I have pelvic organ prolapse? Like, I couldn't figure it out. And then when I went for my annual checkup with my OBGYN, this was at 14 months postpartum. I
Oh,
asked her to check for me, and she says, I think you have a cystocele, which is pelvic organ prolapse of the bladder. I'm like, don't you check these things like at the 6 month or 6 week, sorry, like 6 week checkup, or even after birth? Like, shouldn't that be something that crossed your mind?
right.
That's the frustrating part. And she
So
referred
can
me,
you
go ahead.
explain, like, because we might know what that is, but can you like put that sort of like in basic terms? Like people don't understand what
Okay. Yeah,
that
yeah.
is. Like they're like prolapse, okay. Like
So
what
think
is
of the
that?
pelvic floor as like a sling. So from the front is the pubic bone to the back to your anus, right? And
Right.
so it's supporting all these organs, and it's basically almost like think of it like as a mesh. So it's holding your organs. So it's holding your
Right.
uterus, bladder, um, I'm blanking, rectum,
Right. Yeah.
everything. And over time, that mesh starts to lose its integrity and starts to drop a little bit.
Right.
Sometimes it happens as a result of birth, but for some other people it may have started like earlier, even
Mm-hmm.
like during, I think I had issues probably prior. I was already experiencing leaking prior to giving or even having kids at all. I think
Right.
because as a child I gained a little bit of weight, and my mom put me on this like really fad diet. And so I was so self-conscious of my stomach. So I was always sucking my stomach in. And I think, if you think of the
That
pelvic floor, it's like a
pressure.
canister. So like the top of it is your diaphragm and then the bottom of your pelvic floor. And if you're squeezing in, think of it like, like a tube of toothpaste, if you're squeezing it all in and then that leakage is going to happen. So some of these habits start early on and it doesn't even have to be after birth.
So basically, like sucking in that habit of like sucking in your stomach is actually bad for your pelvic
Yes.
health because it puts pressure down on the pelvic floor.
Yeah,
And it's
think of it like
something
it's squeezing, and then at some point it has to release. And so everything that's in there, I
pressing
also
down.
remember pressing down, but even like your intestines. So sometimes if you're wearing like Spanx or really like tight fitted clothes, it can cause like you can have gas pains and I've experienced that too when I was wearing like really fitted clothes and I worked in a corporate environment. I'm like, why do I have like gas pains? Like all those things matter. And so when your body can't manage that pressure and you're adding more pressure to it, it has to go somewhere and it's usually going to
Hmm.
go down.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Interesting. So you were dying. So it was way past
Yeah.
you had when you had your daughter,
Yeah.
over a year
Over
later,
a year later.
and you
And
had to basically seek out your
so
own care.
I don't care. She actually referred me to a urogynecologist, and a urogynecologist works with women. They usually, when I went to go see her, they basically inserted a catheter, to see like, that's very painful to see like what's going on with the bladder and the urethra, and they give you that official grade. So prolapse can be like grade 0 to 1 is like minimal, and then it goes all the way up to grade 4. So grade 4 is when the organs are basically outside the body at that point, between
Ooh,
like 3 and 4.
ooh,
I was at probably between grade 1 and 2 with
ooh.
my older daughter. With my second daughter, it became grade 2 cystocele, and then I ended up with a grade 2 rectocele. So the rectum drops a little bit too. We can talk about it a little bit, but after, and I was pushing for another script for pelvic floor physical therapy, and she was trying to push for surgery, even though I didn't really need it because I wasn't at that grade. It's only when you're like 3 or 4 that, and she kept like, well, and I'm like, no, I just give me a script for pelvic floor physical therapy because I want to do it the right way. And I actually found a better women's it was a woman who helped me. She did like internal work as well as, mobility externally. And I was able to improve my grade to basically by 2 grades. So,
Wow.
and I was able to run across the street when I remember running across the street to catch a bus and there was like no leaking.
Right. No, no longer peeing your pants.
Yes.
So 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 you were able to and this is something that I wanted to talk about. Like it's kind of amazing to me, you know. So I have I have a daughter, and I have my story is similar to yours up until the actual birth, but I'm older pregnancy. I was induced. Yeah, they did that balloon thing.
That's so horrible.
That was fun. But I no forceps involved. Tear, but you know, there's nobody tells you what you need afterwards, and you go, and it's like, oh, everything should be fine
Yeah.
afterwards. That's it. Oh, you're fine. Six weeks later, you go in 6 weeks later. Yeah, don't. Yeah, what's your post care instruction? You wear the big giant pads.
Right. Yes.
You wear the big giant pads. That's it.
And they're ugly, but now there's a company actually based out of Chicago that has like nicer postpartum underwear. Like it's actually in really nice material, but before that didn't exist, and so I'm giving these really horrible mesh pants.
Yeah,
But the thing is like, you know, the doctors are really concerned like after birth, just like moving your uterus back to where it needs to be, like massaging your uterus, right? And then at the 6 week checkup, they're like, "You're cleared." I'm like, "Clear for what?" like, do you know what I've been doing before this? Like, are you like qualified to tell me I'm cleared for whatever I was doing? Because if I was doing like CrossFit or like powerlifting or
Right.
whatever, like you don't know, like it should be that's what I always tell my clients is like, don't really believe what the doctor's saying. It means you can go run a marathon, right? After
Right.
6 weeks.
Yeah. I feel like the education isn't there. It's like the 6 week myth, and you're fed this sort of myth of the 6 weeks, and that you should suddenly be, like, oh, it's like miraculous that like it's 6 weeks later and you're fine, right? It's like, oh, go back to normal. And it's like,
Yeah. What?
my,
There's no.
are you kidding me? Right.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's not normal at all.
It's new. Right.
And the thing is like they spend all these weeks, or not more than weeks, like 9 months, caring for the baby, all these appointments, and you're getting this one little 6 week checkup, and then you're clear, you're good to go. Like one, like I think in France they get like I don't know how many weeks of pelvic floor physical therapy, but like that's a given standard, whereas we have to fight for it, and the education is not there, and there should be more collaboration with the OBs and the midwives, with pelvic floor physical therapists. And even at that urogynecologist appointment, not only did I find out I had pelvic organ prolapse, I had a partial levator avulsion. So part of like my levator was just like you know nobody knew that until if I didn't ask for that appointment. And the thing that really kills me is that my
Crazy.
doctor said that, well, because of this, if you decide to have another baby, you're going to have to do a C-section. No, says who?
Right. Yeah. Immediately they would just want to, you know, cut. And I do feel a little bit, I can kind of see the physician side in that, they pay, everyone's so litigious now. Like, they get, they get sued for the slightest thing. So if they recommend, oh, you know, go have, a vaginal birth after, you're something more difficult, or you've had a cesarean, you had a C-section the first time and then you try and do vaginal birth the second time, and something goes wrong. It's like they can get, the malpractice insurance is, it's crazy. I understand where they sort of, in a sense, push for,
Yeah.
they're sort of pushed to push for that. So I kind of get, I get where it could be scary for them as physicians to maybe take, and that's sort of what they're taught, to take a different route, but there are doctors out there now sort of moving the other way.
Well, considering my doctor couldn't even help deliver my baby, right? To begin with.
Right.
So with my second daughter, I sought out a really well-seasoned midwife instead, and went that route. And it was it was like complete night and day experience. And this time I hired a doula, because with my first one, I'm like, oh, I don't need a doula. Like, why do I spend the money on a doula? And, my first clue should have been when I handed my doctor my birth plan. She's like, well, I don't want to look at that. She's like, whatever happens will happen. I'm like, well, clearly it
Wow.
did.
That I regret. That is the one regret I have actually in my pregnancy, is I did not get a doula. I did not do that. And I really wish I would have, because I ended up getting an epidural and I really didn't want to.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly positive, had I had a doula in the room, she would have kept me off that track.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
And I just found out, I was listening to a podcast, that fentanyl is in that epidural. So you're kind of.
Well, you definitely can't feel, and it took me, granted, I was not, I was only 30, I was 36 weeks. So I was she was a little early, and, you're numb. So I could feel pressure, right?
Yeah.
No pain. So technically my body wasn't ready to push. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But it took me like 90 minutes to get her out, because like I couldn't, like, it,
Yeah, you don't feel
no
anything.
sensation. And it was like, well, yeah, I don't think it would have taken me as long had I been able to,
Yeah,
actually feel her.
yeah,
I want to kind of touch a little bit on like the facts you had this finally got this diagnosis and you didn't have surgery. I want to talk really quickly about like sort of so when anyone hears pelvic floor and fixing your pelvic floor, immediately everyone goes to what? The Kegel.
yes.
And I kind of want to touch on sort of the myth or sort of like the Kegel not necessarily being the end all be all. Like there's anything wrong, yeah. Do with Kegel, it fixes everything, and it's like,
Yeah. No.
maybe not.
Because I think
No.
for many women, doing a Kegel is actually doing more harm than good because like they may even have like an overactive pelvic floor and like always like squeezing it, and they may actually experience leaks because and that's probably me, like. But then again, like when my physical therapist was testing, I couldn't even do a proper Kegel. So like there's two sides of that coin. Like it may be helpful, but it's like you said, it's not the be all end all. There's other strategies, like I talked about, having proper alignment, stacking your ribs over your hips. And, I watch all these women like sharing on social media, like crossing their legs to sneeze. No, like you shouldn't have to
Right.
do that, like, but if you're in positions all day long where you're where you're slouching or hunched over and all those things, like daily habits add up and those matter too.
Yeah.
And just
Yeah.
buying a device or something is not going to solve everything if you don't address like how your position is or what you're doing throughout the day.
Okay. Yeah. So can you give us like a basic exercise that maybe you were or a breathing technique that you were assigned to help your your pelvic floor that was specific to you, obviously, because
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
depends on what your diagnosis is,
Yeah.
obviously.
I think one of the most important things and after birth, because during pregnancy, obviously your body's changed and your rib cage is expanded. So you're breathing differently when you're pregnant. And so you give birth and then you have to basically retrain your nervous system how to breathe again. I struggle with that. I'm like, what do you mean? Like I could expand my rib cage? Like being able to, and I think I'm considered to be more of like an upper ab gripper. And so when I breathe, I'm like here versus like letting my belly and everything like relax and like breathe in a 360-degree manner, meaning like not only your front, but like your sides and your back and feel that everything
So
expands,
everything expand.
everything expands. And then for most people, and I think why most people don't do Kegels correctly is that so on the inhalation is when you let everything expand, and on the exhalation is when you have that pelvic floor engagement, but it's actually very subtle. Most people like think that you have to grip everything. It's actually a thing about like your front of your hips as headlights, and you just slowly, subtly bring those headlights together on the exhale. And it's almost I call it like as if you're trying to blow a straw with your vagina or
Yeah.
suck up the blueberries through that straw. Like it's a very small, subtle lift. It's not a big movement. And I think people have a tendency to really use all, and then they engage everything else. They're engaging their other muscles like their glutes and they grip their feet. Like none of that stuff needs to come into play. It's just like a very subtle movement.
Huh. Interesting. Interesting. So really like working on that breath, like expanding like down in through the diaphragm, like that
Yes.
big
And
breath.
I think starting on your back,
And so lying down and
yeah,
doing it.
lying down with your knees bent and starting on your
Knees bent.
back, because I think when you, especially early on postpartum, doing it standing, you're going to have that tendency to engage everything else that shouldn't come into play. It's just starting on your back, and it's basically you're having to retrain how to breathe again without a expanded rib cage and like a baby that's pushing it, you know.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Interesting, interesting. And the last thing that I wanted to sort of touch on, sort of is the myth, and you talked about it really sort of that like when you ran for the train and it was like, okay, like it's like, okay, I just peed my pants. Like is, and I hear a lot of women, especially women that have had children, but even women that are like menopause, right? There is this acceptance sort of worldwide, or at least here in the US. I can't speak for, obviously I don't live anywhere else. I've only lived here in the US. Is there's this acceptance that if you've had children or you're over the age of, 55 or whatever, or 60, that you pee your pants. Like
Yeah.
that it is not, I'm trying to tell people it is not normal to pee your pants.
It's
They're
not a
like, oh,
badge
I
of
had
honor.
kids, you pee your pants. It's just like, no, it is not like, so right, am I crazy here, Suzanne?
No,
Or
no. And every, like I see, and social media does not help whatsoever. Moms that are scrolling while they're nursing their kids in the middle of the night and watching the stuff and trying to, bounce back. Or, that's another myth that I hate.
we could spend
Um,
hours on that.
but I
Could spend
think
hours on that.
that, this is something that needs to be addressed. It's not normal. It shouldn't be considered part of like, oh, you gave birth, so it's normal. It's not normal. It's a sign. It's a sign from your body that it needs to be addressed. Because as you go into other stages of life, like perimenopause, menopause, if you don't address this now, like it's actually going to get worse because all those muscles of the pelvic floor, as I talked about earlier, is like if you're not strengthening them, and it's not just about doing Kegels, like you do things that you do in your everyday life, like, you know, lift up, carrying grocery bags or whatever, like things that you carrying a stroller, like, there's like, oh, don't lift more than 10 pounds when you leave the hospital. Well, I have a baby in a car seat who's like 7 to 8 pounds. I
Right.
have, a stroller. I have like my diaper bag. You're telling me I can't lift more than 10 pounds?
Right. Like
Be
everything
real.
more than 10 pounds. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do
So
I have like a side? Do you send me home with like a side? Yeah. Like somebody coming with besides my partner that I get to, you know,
it's crazy. Like the the reasoning makes zero sense, and most women don't realize, and they just accept that as like the standard. And I think we need to really change that.
yeah.
All these myths.
One, one, one person at a time, hopefully, is what
Yeah.
we can do. So do you have any? I want to, yeah.
I don't think I can hear Christy on her mic though.
Oh, can't hear you on your.
Like it goes in and out.
Oh,
Laura, you might have to repeat her question.
oh. So she said that is there one thing that you would tell women specifically um, about like pelvic floor health? Is that what you're gonna? Yeah. That's so that you would leave us with like one thing that you would, if there was one thing you could tell women to focus on with their pelvic floor, or sort of that you would change, like what would that be? What would you
Oh, that's pretty
advocate
interesting.
for? You know?
If you don't mind, I'm going to spend a little deep dive into my second
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
birth.
Yeah. Do it. Do it.
It so the birth itself actually was way better.
This is your second
My
daughter,
second, yeah,
right?
and second daughter, and it was literally I hired a doula, but I really didn't need the doula because she was like literally out in like 30 minutes. Like it was I had
Quick.
Pitocin, my blood pressure was super high. That was the only one thing that was different. Um, but I had a really hard time the second time with pelvic floor physical therapy. Like I thought it would be as easy as the first time, and it wasn't. And I
Hmm.
struggled not only with I was it was very painful for me to do basic things like hinging, like just brushing my teeth and then reaching over to go wipe my hands. Like it hurt. And all the strategies I thought would work the first time would work the second time, didn't. And it wasn't as good of an experience for me. And I was still trying to find answers. And I actually breastfed my younger daughter for over 5 years, longer than with my first. And so
Wow.
I gave birth to her when I was 45 years old, and she is now 6.5 years old, and I'm 52. So you do the math. It's like I did not expect to be. She really loved nursing. Like she wouldn't take a bottle, and finally after she turned 5, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I need to like.
All right, we're finished.
So I think that part of it too, like kind of messed up with a lot of stuff with my hormones. Like I can't, my menstrual cycle right now is kind of all over the place. It would I would not have one for 2 months, and then now I would have one for like a month. It was kind of
Yeah.
crazy. But going back to pelvic floor, like I actually went to go see a pelvic floor physical therapist here locally to me in Northwest Indiana, and it wasn't the same experience. And so I actually started seeing a neurologically focused chiropractor as of July of last year. Actually, my older daughter went to go see him first because she was dealing with some uh, nervous system trauma, not only from prenatally during the pregnancy and the trauma from the birth and postpartum. Um, she started seeing him because she was having like really hard time with emotional regulation and things like that. So she's actually been healing from that. And I started seeing him right after she started seeing him, and I was doing fine. But then like I was on these supplements, my normal supplements, and my chiropractor's like, it seems like your HRV and your other numbers like took a hit and going in the reverse direction. And we're like, we don't, something seems off. So he told me to do actually a detox on all my supplements because it seemed like my
Really?
body was using all the energy to try to process that when my nervous system wasn't completely healed. Because I had not only I
Interesting.
had trauma from birth, I got hit by a car when I was 12. I had generational trauma as a child, and so all this buildup, my nervous system, just like with my older daughter, was completely exhausted, like basically on the gas pedal all the time. And he
Showing
basically,
up now.
yeah. And so like pelvic floor physical therapy wasn't working for me the second time around. I couldn't figure it out. And I was talking to him about it. He says, well, the nervous system, if it's completely exhausted and not healed yet, then none of the other systems, hormones, pelvic floor, or any of that will be able to function optimally.
Yeah.
So think of like the nervous system as like, the central center of your body that controls everything. And so because of that, I'm I since when I did the detox like in January, February this year, all of a sudden my sleep numbers skyrocketed like in the 90s. My HRV was like in optimal ranges. My blood pressure that I've been trying to figure out since I gave birth to my younger daughter is finally like going back
Normal.
to better to normal.
Close. Okay.
And it was because of all these different things. And so I've kind of shifted a little bit. I always thought that pelvic floor physical therapy should be your first go-to, but actually I advocate for moms to heal their nervous system first and get that, because that process of being pregnant and going into labor and giving birth is a very huge trauma in the body in itself. And that physical pelvic floor physical therapy is one component, but you need to really heal that nervous system and get everything online first, and then those other systems will work better. This is based on my second experience. So
Wow.
yeah.
Very cool. Interesting. All right. Well, busting one myth at a time here, like figuring it out. Well, Suzanne, thank you so much for yes, for
Thanks for having
sharing,
me.
yes, we really appreciate your time. And so yeah, thanks for listening, and until then, yes, stay untamed and unapologetic, right? Woo! Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.